All right, Roto Grinders, here we are. It's your old pal EMac once again traveling for the holiday weekend. So you can see this luxurious hotel accommodations behind me. Very nice. It's one of those suites with a little office and a fridge stocked with beer and Diet Pepsi. Oh, let's turn it this way. Diet Pepsi. I know Cards is a Coke fan, but that's okay. Because we're going to agree to disagree on that, and we're going to bring you some of the best college football fantasy advice that is out there on the interwebs, the intranet, the galaxy, I guess. So, Cards, quickly, for the human computer, how was baseball last night? I actually ended up with 4 tickets in the big DraftKings contest. Cashed 2 of them, $2,500, not bad. That gives me a nice little cushion to play around with. Did well on the last FanDuel one. So I'm all set for a little college football and some, dare we say, NFL that's just a week away. But how are you doing? Did you have fun last night in that contest?
No, I ended up getting really mad. I had a Ranger stack with that stud rookie for the Cubs, Soler, that hit 2 home runs last night, and I was in 10th place with neither of my pitchers having started yet, and everyone above me, had both their pitchers done. So I knew there were some people, behind that could creep up, but all I needed was 20 points from Felix Hernandez on DraftKings to finish second in that tournament last night, and he threw a crapper up there, so I think I ended up like 13th or something, but that was probably the most potential I've ever seen. I actually thought I had a chance to win that thing going into the late night with both my pitchers still to go, and they kind of wet the bed, so I'm ready for football.
All right. Yeah, I had similar dreams, but they didn't quite work out for me. So, in any event, I can see we have a touch of lag here, but that's okay. I think we'll be all right. If we crash protocol, Justin, I'll reboot my computer and you keep the show going strong. So, with that, let's talk a little bit about the industry. There are a lot of sites that have fantasy football this year, college style. Of course, DraftKings, our sponsor, $200,000 in GPPs today. Unbelievable. I'm guessing that, just a couple years ago, $200,000 was about a month's worth of GPPs just in NFL. Here we are in college football. So on DraftKings, they have early slate and the late slate. And, of course, we have late swap. Their format is 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex. You'll notice no kicker and defense. I think all of the sites have gotten rid of kicker and defense at this point. Draft Day has about $4,000 in GPPs. They run a similar lineup, 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, 2 flex. The trick there, 6 points per passing touchdown. I should circle back and say with DraftKings, there are bonus yardage milestones for 100-yard rushers and receivers and 300-yard passers, as well as there are 4 points per passing touchdown. FanDuel, we got a ton of game slates all over the place, but there are 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and 6 points per passing touchdown. So running quarterbacks quite aren't as valuable there. But, hey, running quarterbacks in college are valuable no matter what. And then Fantasy Feud was the other side I looked at. They have early and 3 p.m. game slates, 2K and GPPs, 3 quarterback, 3 running back, 3 wide receiver, tight end, 4 points per passing set. So they have 3 quarterbacks. That's their differentiator. And then I also know that Fantasy Aces does have the game. I didn't have a chance to sign on there this morning. So we've got lots of stuff going on. I think we'll focus mostly on DraftKings, obviously because they're our sponsor, and then FanDuel because they are where a lot of people play. So we'll kind of focus on their prices. But as we spot other things, we'll throw those out for you guys. So now that we've got the groundwork laid there, Justin, what do you think is a good strategy? Since you are the human computer, how are you analyzing this sport?
Well, I've talked a lot about the importance of dual threat quarterbacks in college football. College football is so high scoring that you can really get points racked up in a hurry, and running quarterbacks can really help you do that. You see quarterbacks in college that can get 150, 175 yards on the ground. That just doesn't happen in the NFL. So if you're new to daily fantasy college football, you will notice the higher scoring aspect of it. Quarterbacks are a big part, especially if you're on a multiple quarterback site. I know there's been some weeks where if you pick the 2 highest scoring quarterbacks, that can win you some games almost by itself. So don't skip on the quarterback position. That's kind of one of my golden rules of college football. Now, if you find a good value, sure, plop them in there, but you don't just need to go punting to get big time guys elsewhere. Vegas odds are very important. I mean, you can go through the Vegas odds and and get relevant information about team point totals really quickly. So that's a good tool to use. I mean, I know you went through some of the odds, so if you can find a high-scoring game, especially one that a projected high-scoring game, especially one that doesn't have a large spread between the two teams, it's not expected to be a blowout. Those are pretty good games to target from a fantasy perspective. So I'll let you go through the odds a little bit, and then I can talk some injuries.
All right, a couple of the big ones we want to look at. Now, this is a Sunday game, but Baylor, got their quarterback is returning, their top wide receiver, Goodley, is returning. 75 over/under. They're favored by 32, but there's going to be a lot of action. I don't know that many sites are going to have this one because that's a Sunday game, but we're going to be talking a lot about Baylor this season. The one that I've got my eye on is Florida. They're a minus 35-point favorite against Idaho with a big over/under. I think they're going to be looking to reestablish their offense. Their quarterback is returning to health. They've got a couple good running backs. We'll get to them shortly, but I like that game a lot, so we'll want to focus on Florida. We have West Virginia going into Alabama. 25-point favorite Alabama. That's going to be a tricky one to go through. So we'll just have some individual plays on that one. But I think they might go deeper into the depth chart today. They've got a couple running backs. Bama does. They got Cooper. They got a quarterback. So we'll see how they're going there. The one I really like is USC. I'm always a sucker for Pac-10, and I'm going to call them Pac-10 even though they're the Pac-12. The Pac-10 teams. USC, very sneaky, kind of off some people's radar. Fresno State is no defense, but they have a heavy offense. They're going to have a new quarterback, but I think this is going to work into a shootout without Derek Carr nonetheless. Navy and OSU. OSU, big favorite there on the road. Cal and Northwestern. We're going to highlight a lot of players from this game. I can't remember. Didn't this game have close to like 80 points in it last year? Cards?
Yeah, it was the season opener last year. It was out in California, so it was the late night West Coast start, and there was fantasy goodness all abound. But the problem was last year we didn't know about a lot of these guys. Cal had a lot of freshmen last year, and and Northwestern's a little bit different team now, which we'll touch on when we get to those positions. So a little bit more, previous knowledge coming in this year, and I think those guys will be more heavily owned than they were last year.
Yeah, and that. I remember that one swinging a lot of contests late. You thought you were out of it, and all of a sudden you were in it, and you thought you were safe. And holy crap, if you didn't have one of those guys, a little bit of trouble there, a little consternation when you woke up the next morning, or if you stayed up all night like the youngsters do. Lastly, we want to talk about Oklahoma State, Florida State. The reigning Heisman Trophy winner is a 17-point favorite in a contest with 64 over/under. Now, they've graduated some of their backs there, so we'll look to see who we like in that one. Is Wilder back, or is he in the pros?
Yeah, he's gone too.
I knew Devontae Freeman was, but they still have Green at wide receiver. They got Winston, so we'll get to their bevy of guys to take a peek at and look at. But I think those are some of the higher scoring ones. Now we're going to get to more individual matchups and stuff like that, but those are ones you want to focus on where we can get a lot of fantasy goodness. You're looking. Remember, this is college. You need to get those quarterbacks that score 4+ touchdowns. You need to have running backs with 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, or you're just going to get wiped. That's why you're watching us, because we're going to help you find the guys that are in a position to do that. So cards. Braxton Miller, that's just the one that made everybody sad. We'll tee it up with that for lineup news. But dang, he was in line for such a huge year, in my opinion, especially now that he was going to be the only guy in town without Carlos Hyde. But such is life. It's going to provide us some opportunity. Take her away on the injuries.
Yeah, Ohio State's got some issues. I mean, I would have thought they'd have been a dark horse pick to make the college football playoff as one of the Final Four teams this year. And now I think really, you got a couple spots there that are wide open, so it's going to be an interesting year for sure. Obviously, Braxton Miller, he touched on it, he's out for the season. J.T. Barrett is the replacement for Ohio State. Remember that name. He's not available on DraftKings because he was actually the 3rd quarterback on the depth chart when they released their early depth chart before Braxton Miller was injured. So DraftKings does not have him available. FanDuel does have him available because they pretty much include everyone, on to third and fourth string quarterbacks. So JT Barrett, you can take on FanDuel. He's minimum price there. Let's see. Miles, the quarterback for Washington. I'll let you talk about him. I don't exactly know the circumstances there, but he's been suspended. So he will not play tonight. Jeff Lindquist is going to be their starter. I'll let you touch on that when I finish up the injury news here. Venrick Mark, the running back for Northwestern, really would have been in store for a good game against Cal. He has transferred out. He was originally going to be suspended for a couple games anyhow. Just wasn't getting along with the coaching staff there, so he has transferred out of Northwestern. Devontae Parker for Louisville injured himself in practice the other day. He's going to be out 6 to 8 weeks. So take him off your radar for a while. Notre Dame has kicked off their top wide receiver for some academic issues, Davaris Daniels. So scratch him off your target list this season. And then Zach Brooks, who was slated to be the starting running back for Clemson, is out for the season. So Clemson going through a lot of transition. They've lost Taj Boyd and Sammy Watkins to the pros, and now their starting running back is out for the year. So transition year at Clemson. Could be some cheap fantasy value at the start of the year, though. Other injuries, Malcolm Mitchell, starting wide receiver for Georgia, is doubtful today with a knee injury. I wouldn't take any chances on him today. And then William Stanback for Central Florida, also doubtful. And a couple guys listed as probable. Ezekiel Elliott, who's going to be the starting running back for Ohio State and does get a value boost with Braxton Miller out, had wrist surgery about 3 weeks ago. He's good to go today, but the question is going to be, how many carries is he going to get? I don't know. Urban Meyer really isn't saying how he's going to split the work between Ezekiel Elliott and Rod Smith. I'm probably off that situation for week 1 to see how it shakes out. But Elliott will be the starter most likely going forward. Ty Montgomery, the number 1 wide receiver for Stanford. If you've played fantasy college football last year, you probably got used to that name a little bit. A very solid athlete for the Stanford Cardinal. He's going to play today, but he might be limited in his snap count as well. I wouldn't take him today. I'd let him show that he's fully healthy before rostering him. And then Jonathan Gray, one of the starting backs for Texas, is also probable. Haven't seen any indication, though, as to how many carries he's going to get. So what's up with Miles?
All right, well, there was some sort of incident right around the Super Bowl. He and a couple of his buddies, also football players, came upon some people wearing Denver Bronco jacket, or I don't know. In any event, there was a little bit of a rumble, an altercation, a snafu, whatever you want to say. Fisticuffs were exchanged, and he is suspended for the first game. Jeff Lindquist is going to be starting. He is, I wanted to call him out on Fantasy Feud. He is $50K, so minimum salary there. The Huskies are a 17-point favorite. There's a 56 over-under in this game, so they're going to put up some points. I don't know where it's all going to go. I don't mind Lindquist, especially on Fantasy Feud as my third quarterback. Their running back situation is cloudy this year. Remember, Bishop Sankey was pretty much the show for the last 2 seasons, and he left early and is now with the Tennessee Titans. They're running out what they're calling the core 4, so I don't think there's really any running back value. They're going to lean on a bunch of them, I think, with Lindquist, but it's going to be a bunch of them. So, unfortunately, I don't think there's a ton of value that's going to really pop here, but Lindquist on multi-quarterback sites isn't too bad. That's where we're leaving that one at. Siler Miles will be back in the next game.
I like him as a sleeper pick once he gets his head on straight. It just depends on how he's priced in the matchups. But I hate to say it, but your Washington defense isn't exactly a world beater, so they're going to have to put up some points to win some games. So
we'll be talking about them a lot and their opponents as the season goes on. Don't you worry. Don't you worry, Cards. Don't you worry, chat. There's going to be a lot of Husky talk this season.
Yeah, let's move to quarterbacks now. It's interesting breaking down the slates today because DraftKings does offer the games where there's Division I schools playing FCS schools. They offer the Division I schools. You can take players from that game. FanDuel does not. And on the flip side, FanDuel is using Conference USA and DraftKings is not. So you have some overlap in the player pools. But then you have some that are exclusive to DraftKings, and you have some that are exclusive to FanDuel. Other sites are all over the map. So we can't necessarily just give you a play that you can use on every site. So it's a little bit tricky there. So just know that. I'll try to mention site-specific stuff where I can. If you want DraftKings only, since they're our sponsor site, I go through some of them first. Some guys with good matchups, and again, these games are not expected to be very close when the Division I teams are playing the FCS teams. So you worry about a blowout. In those circumstances, like I said with Dan the other night on our playbook video, I don't like to take pure pocket passers because there's a chance that they might not run up a lot of stats in that blowout. If you can take a running quarterback, they're liable to still get their stats even if they're only in for, say, 3 quarters. So with that being said, I do like Devin Gardner against Appalachian State. Remember, Michigan lost to Appalachian State in 2006. Or it might have been 2008, one of those 2 years. Michigan lost to Appalachian State, and they're not going to overlook them. I think they'll come out pedal to the metal, and I like Devin Gardner as a guy to put up some big stats this afternoon. Also like Matty Mock from Missouri. He's going to be the leader of that offense now. They've lost a lot of their core talent, and he can do it with his legs too. So Matty Mock, Devin Gardner, they're both the $7K range on DraftKings. I think that's a nice, reasonable price tag for them. They're not $8, $9K like some of the guys you'll see in the later slates. So I like those 2 guys as targets, along with C.J. Brown for Maryland. Again, if you played last year, you realized what he could do with his legs. He could easily rack up 100, 150 rushing yards himself. He's 6,400 on DraftKings, so I like him as a target. Those 3 guys for the early slate on DraftKings. For the late slate, there's the quarterbacks I like on DraftKings are mainly overlapping between the sites. There's most of the site-specific plays that are only available on one of the 2 main sites are in the early set. The late sets jive a little bit better because there's not a lot of Division II schools going. So I like Dak Prescott from Mississippi State, another dual-threat quarterback with a good matchup, and Jeff Driscoll for Florida. You mentioned it in the odds. Florida's a 35-point favorite. They've totally revamped their offensive scheme this year. They're going to go hurry up, no huddle, run and shoot type offense. And although their offense was horrible last year, this is a perfect matchup to try this out against Idaho. They have no defense whatsoever, and I think you'll see a nice stat line from Driscoll tonight against Idaho, and he's also not very expensive. So those are my late slate picks on DraftKings. If you want a couple of FanDuel-only guys, Rakeem Cato in the early slate, you'll have to pay for him, but like Dan said in our After Dark show on Thursday, his floor is probably 4 touchdowns today. Marshall's going to put up some points against Miami, Ohio. So Rakeem Cato is probably your safest pick in the early slate. And I already touched on J.T. Barrett. Bare minimum price on FanDuel, $4,500. And Ohio State's still a solid favorite against Navy, so I don't mind J.T. Barrett on FanDuel at that minimum price. A couple other guys I like in general that are available on pretty much every site. Jacoby Brissett for North Carolina State, Brett Hundley for UCLA, and then we talked about that Cal-Northwestern shootout. Jared Goff and Trevor Siemian both very much in play as well. The only worry there is the weather. It is soggy. It is damp in Chicago today. Might be a concern for the passing game. It's a little bit windy too, so that might be a slight downgrade to Jared Goff and Trevor Siemian. I wouldn't totally come off of them, but the weather is a concern there. So that's my picks at quarterback today.
All right. Yes, I completely agree on Gardner, Cato, and Hundley. They're all over my lineups today. Barrett is great. You can get a lot of running back power with him when you get him on your lineup. One guy I'm not playing today, but I will later in the season, is Marcus Mariota. He's just, the odds are too high. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with that offense. They've got a bevy of running backs. They got a couple guys returning, and they have some all-world freshmen that's joining him. So I don't want to have Mariota out there. It wouldn't shock me if somehow he ends up with a couple touchdowns and 300 combined yards, but he's just a little too pricey. Jared Goff is nice on FanDuel. I think there's going to be a lot of high circus acts in that game. So we're kind of zeroing in on pretty much the same players, but I wanted to ask you about a couple other guys here. What about the Notre Dame quarterback who has returned after besmirching the institution with his, I forget if it was peeking at somebody else's test or something along those lines. But he's back. What are your thoughts about him?
Yeah, I think Golson's certainly in play today. Good matchup against Rice. Don't really know what to expect from him or what their game plan is going to be. It's hard with him having missed a season. Are they going to ease him back in? Are they going to try to establish the run game? I don't know, but he's a dual threat guy as well. I don't like him as much as some of the other guys, but he's 5,800 on DraftKings. That's a step below some of the other options. So if you need to save a little bit more salary, I certainly don't mind rolling Everett Golson out there today. I think he's got a pretty safe floor. I think he's a nice pick for cash games, but I wouldn't expect 6 touchdowns or anything like that. I don't think he has the ceiling that some of these other guys do.
All right, and sadly, is it Logan Thomas? Was that the guy? Who was Dan's favorite quarterback?
Yeah, it was Logan Thomas.
Logan Thomas. No Logan Thomas this season, Dan. I'm sorry. We're going to talk about him just this week.
That's going to win Dan some more money. Logan Thomas being gone will automatically increases Dan's ROI just by Logan Thomas being gone.
Exactly. Get him out of your options there, Dan. Another guy I wanted to bring up was Justin Thomas. He's got the wheel for the Ramblin' Wreck of Georgia Tech. What do you think about him? I noticed he wasn't on all of the sites as an option, so I did mostly an early FanDuel look. God, they have so many cuts, maybe I missed him. But what are your thoughts on him today?
I don't know if I go there. They just don't throw the ball enough, and with the running production being what it is, you never know if it's going to come from one of the backs in their style of offense or if it's going to come from the quarterback position. There's just too many other options today, so I wouldn't go that route. But I think there's some upside to be had there. You never know, breaking off a long touchdown or something like that. Just not on my radar today.
All right, a couple other guys on my list. What about Houston Mason in that Georgia-Clemson game?
Yeah, I was on him earlier in the week, but the injuries to Malcolm Mitchell, and then I believe they have another wide receiver that's out or suspended as well. They're missing 2 of their top 4 wideouts. Has cooled me a bit on him. A lot of people are high on Clemson's defense, which surprises me. I think that they're kind of being a little bit overrated. But with the wide receiver position being a little skeptical and it being Hudson Mason's first year as a starter full time, I've cooled on him a bit since we taped our college football playbook segment. I think you're going to see a whole lot of Todd Gurley from Georgia today.
Yeah, I think with Gurley healthy, I think that's where we're going to go. The Belldozer, playing tight end, but taking snaps as a second-string quarterback. Is that just getting too cute, rostering him at tight end today, hoping he gets a rushing touchdown as the quarterback?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody will do it, but like I said with Dan, if you want to be ahead of the pack, this is the week to do it. Because if he gets a couple rushing touchdowns, everyone's going to be on him next week, or the sites are going to switch him back to quarterback, or he's just going to be insanely expensive. So I think it's a GPP option if you want to go there. I'm not, but I can see the merit in doing it, though.
All right. A couple other names I had down here. C.J. Brown, you mentioned him. I like him living in the Virginia area or nearby Maryland. I hear a lot about him. He's gets a lot of rushing touchdowns, so I think he's pretty good. Davis Webb.
Yeah, I like him. Price is kind of high, but Texas Tech loves to throw the football, and I think his floor probably is 400 yards and 4 touchdowns before he comes out of that game tonight too. I just don't like the price tag, similar to Mariota. I mean, if I was going that high, I'd probably just take my chances with Mariota. But the prices on Davis Webb all over the map on the sites that are offering that game. I know I peeked at Draft Day. I think he was really cheap, or one of the smaller sites. If Davis Webb is really cheap, lock him into your lineups. Otherwise, I think he's a little too expensive on DraftKings to take.
Yeah, I'm betting it's probably, I think it was like 109,000 on Fantasy Feud if I remember. So not, yeah. I mean, Mariota's 200, but there are other quarterbacks just a little more pricey that I'd rather have than him. My 2 last guys are Jeff Driscoll. No, we mentioned him. I'm sorry. Jacoby Brissett, North Carolina State. Did I write that down correctly, or is he playing North Carolina State?
Yeah, no, North Carolina State. Yeah, I like Brissett today. I think he's a guy that's going to fly under the radar. Um, I think he's going to be under-owned and a good matchup. He's in a system with Dave Doran that works for him. And, Dave Doran was the coach at Northern Illinois when Chandler Harnish and Jordan Lynch were there. And we saw what kind of numbers that they put up. And Brissett was a highly touted prospect when he went to Florida, transferred to North Carolina State. Obviously, the matchup is against a Patsy today, so I think you're going to see some really good numbers from him.
Okay, and then we didn't mention Jameis Winston.
Yeah, Jameis Winston is Jameis Winston. I mean, he's perfectly fine for the late slate of games. His price is high, but you know what you're going to get in terms of production from him. He's the epitome of a safe pick.
All right, so chat, as you can see, we could probably continue talking for another 15 minutes on quarterbacks. There are just many options out there today. It's going to be like this a lot of the season. That's okay. Most sites are multi-quarterback sites, so we do want to give due and proper to giving our analysis to that position. But I think we're ready to move on over to the running back spot. I know we're going to just be all over Amir Abdullah, Todd Gurley. We mentioned Gurley. He's finally healthy. I like him a lot today. Abdullah, a lot of big odds, big heavy favorites in that game, but I still think he's the kind of guy that can get 120 yards and 2 touchdowns even in a half of work, no issues. So those are who I'm looking at the high end. I also like Melvin Gordon. They've got 2 running backs there, but God, they're going to pound the ball a lot. Tougher matchup for him today, but I still like him because that's going to be a close game, and we know that close games usually mean a lot of carries for the running back, especially if you're a running team, so you have the opportunity to just churn away, and those stats will start to add up. Who are you looking at for running backs? Because I know there's a lot more to talk about than just those 3 guys.
Yeah, just one-on-one, I'd give Gurley the edge over Abdullah in the day games. I've got a lot of exposure to both guys simply because you can fit them both in relatively easily no matter what site you're playing on. But with the odds, how heavily Nebraska's favored in that game, and the fact that Abdullah does lose some carries and generally at the goal line to Amani Cross is a little bit of a concern. So I give Gurley the edge over Abdullah, but I like them both. And Gordon, obviously, for the late games, that game should be close and competitive, and Melvin Gordon's a guy that averaged 7.8 yards per carry last season. One of the highest totals I've ever seen. I think he's the Heisman candidate from the non-quarterback class this season. So Melvin Gordon, he's matchup proof. LSU's defense isn't what it was 3 years ago when we saw those 9-6 games against Alabama. Gordon should be just fine. I think he'll get his numbers today. In terms of other backs towards the high end, I do like Tevin Coleman for Indiana and Josh Ferguson for Illinois on DraftKings. They have very easy matchups. Tevin Coleman gets to take on Indiana State. Josh Ferguson, I believe they're playing Youngstown State. Those are both backs that do a little bit of everything. They can catch passes out of the backfield. It's a great bonus on DraftKings with a point per reception. And I think you'll see some nice fantasy games from both of those guys today. Miles Willis gets the keys to the Boston College running game with the departure of Andre Williams. And you saw what they did with Andre Williams in the past. They weren't afraid to give that guy 30 carries in a game. Miles Willis could be the next stud running back simply based on volume at Boston College. They take on a terrible UMass team today. Unfortunately, his price isn't as favorable as I thought it was going to be. He's not exactly cheap anywhere. The sites did a good job of pricing him up and knowing those circumstances. So I don't think Miles Willis is a must-play, but if you find a site where he's relatively cheap, obviously feel free to plug him in. And then your sleeper play of the day is Trayvon Green for Northwestern. I mentioned the transfer of Venrick Mark, and their other backup running back, Stephen Buckley, has been dealing with an injury. So Trayvon Green becomes the guy, easily the number 1 back at Northwestern. That's going to be a very high-scoring game against Cal. So Trayvon Green's definitely a guy you want to plug in this morning. And then Carlos Williams is now the starting running back for Florida State with Freeman and Wilder both gone. He's way too cheap everywhere. Carlos Williams almost a must-play for the late slate games. Some other situations to monitor. Some Big Ten teams. I know you have a note there about the Pac-12. I'll let you talk about that. But the Big Ten teams, Michigan, I have no idea what they're going to do with their running back situation, and their offensive line's a mess. I don't think you can go to the running game for guaranteed production from Michigan. Derek Green is probably going to be the starter. I'm not touching it, but there is some upside there for a GPP if you want to go there. And I already mentioned I'm not going to touch the Ohio State backfield until we figure out how the carries are going to be split between Elliott and Rod Smith with Carlos Hyde gone. Platoons are scary. If it's a team like Wisconsin, there's room for two backs there with Gordon and Clement. We saw what they did last year with James White and Melvin Gordon, and they both got their numbers almost every week. But if it's not a team that's going to run the ball like 40 times a game, Alabama, same thing. TJ Yeldon, Derrick Henry, I think they're both decent options today if you want to take that route. But otherwise, platoon situations are just scary in general if you don't know who's going to be the lead guy, especially when you get a third or fourth running back involved. So I tend to steer clear of that as much as I can and try to get as many feature backs in there as I can.
Yeah, it's running back until it kind of shakes out is an interesting animal in college football. But hitting on your other ones, totally agree. Carlos Williams is underpriced a lot of places. The Pac-12, Pac-10, whatever, it's kind of messy. We lost a lot of lead backs to the NFL last year, and several of the teams actually played on Thursday. So we're kind of down to UCLA. I think you can look towards Jordan James, who is cheaper on most sites, but he's also got to deal with Paul Perkins, so both those guys are going to be in the mix. The Huskies, as I mentioned, they're going to run 3 or 4 guys today. They're a mess. Oregon, while talented, has Byron Marshall returning. They've got, I forget, their other backup that stepped in, and now they got some freshman who's just been wowing them in practice. So who knows what they're going to do there, and especially with them being such heavy favorites, I don't want to really put any coin down on that one. So I don't know. Today is not really a day I'm playing the Pac-10 running backs. The quarterbacks and receivers, you betcha. The running backs, not so much. One guy I saw out there, and I know we had played him a little bit last year. I think it's Akeem Hunt for Purdue. Is cheaper than I would have thought, but then again, I'm the same guy who played. Who was it yesterday? McCombs, because he fit perfectly in my lineup, and I'm on vacation. I didn't want to look to see if he was playing or not. He's not even with the team, so I'm going to throw out Akeem with a little hesitation. Why is he so cheap? Am I missing something on that one? Because boy, I certainly whiffed last night.
Yeah, I gave Davis Maddock a good bit of crap on Twitter yesterday because he said, no matter what you do, don't roster Lyle McCombs because UConn is so bad. And I just responded to his tweet. I said they kicked him off the team 2 months ago. And it wasn't really announced that much. But, their new coach didn't have much patience for Lyle McCombs and his shenanigans. He got suspended at varying times under the previous regime, and they just decided to give him the heave-ho. So not that it really mattered. I mean, they looked terrible last night, and they're trying like 4 different backs in his place. It's just not pretty. You can pretty much cross UConn off your fantasy list this season. I don't care who they're playing. Don't roster anyone from UConn all season. That'll be your tip for the day for UConn. Just cross them off and pretend they're not playing. Akeem Hunt, as to him, he's like a hybrid back, like a scatter back type. They like to get him the ball in space. But he's not your 20-carry type guy. I think Purdue's not really going to use him in that role this year. They tried it a few times last season, and it worked in spurts, but, I mean, he's the kind of guy that gets 2 yards, 1 yard, 2 yards, and then he breaks off a 50-yarder. So he's better in limited bursts as opposed to trying to give him 20 carries. I think he's a GPP option, but I wouldn't roll him out in any cash games.
All right. Yeah, that was just kicking myself. Fortunately, I didn't play too much. So let's just segue for just a second on a strategy question. Do you play mostly cash games, 3-mans, double-ups in college football, or do you go for heavy in some of the GPPs? I mean, it's such wild scoring. I kind of learned last year that it's much more profitable for me to stay in those cash game type setups. But what are your thoughts on that, and how do you approach GPPs? Because my God, you really just have to hit on every position, it seems like.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the opposite with football, and it goes for the NFL too. I know everyone's getting excited about all these announcements, the big football tournaments. I'm much more disciplined with football than I am with a sport like baseball, where I'm pretty much a full-on tournament player. With college football, I'm probably I'd say 15% max GPP, and maybe 10% three-man, five-man, and then 75% straight up cash games, head-to-heads, double-ups. It's just you get some diversity that way. I also use, 3 lineups per site tends to be what I go for. Dan and I talked the other night a little bit about that. College football is the perfect sport to roll out multiple lineups and still not lose much edge, because there's just so many options out there. And if you try to roll one lineup every week, you'll eventually get dinged by some injuries or just a guy that gets benched for lack of production, and it's so nice to have some diversity in there. So I'm pretty much the exact opposite of baseball with football. I'm definitely, more geared towards cash games, and it seemed to work well last year, so hopefully it will again, and that's, I'm going to use the same strategy for college football and NFL that I did last season.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and definitely agree with the multiple lineups. I mean, I do a fair, kind of like a third, a third, a third, so there's a ton of overlap, but I
Right.
don't get destroyed, because I've had that happen before, and it's no fun, because college football is almost like the NBA, in that if you get a 0 from a position that is
you're done.
not your tight end,
You're done.
game over. Especially with all the news and available information that's out there. 2 years ago, you get away with it. 3 years ago, it was just cha-ching the whole time. Now, there's a lot more savvy players out there that are playing some really, really heavy volume. So if you're on sites without a matchup blocker, you can get a lot of money to the same guy. And if you miss out on whomever is suspended and their backups in play, or some wrinkle amongst the 100 and whatever teams there are at play every week, you can get creamed. You can get creamed real easy. But the good thing is there's a lot of dead money out there, because people just like to pick the conferences they know or their own teams just to have a little rooting interest. So I think cash games is where it's at. So back to running back. Let's see, I'm going to look at my list here. We mentioned Gordon. Langford already played. Carlos Williams, Trayvon Green. That's pretty much all my main ones. I'm focusing. It seems to be just an upper core, and again, a bunch of them played Thursday and Friday, so this will happen from time to time. But I think there's enough talented guys amongst that you have plenty of options. So let's go to wide receiver. Let's start off with somebody that had a real disappointing year last year because of injury and just general. He was just in a slump. But that would be Cooper for Alabama. And I know he's the guy that Dan always mentioned too. So he's the new guy. He's the new Logan Thomas. Talk to me about him.
I was just gonna say that we talked about him on Thursday, and Alabama just settled on a starting quarterback, and if Cooper couldn't do it last year with a 4-year starter under center and A.J. McCarron, I don't know why everyone just thinks he's gonna all of a sudden turn it on and be the stud that we all expected him to be last year. We just got burned by him time and time and time again. And what Alabama's going to do in this game today, which they're favored by 20-some points, they're going to hand the ball off to T.J. Yeldon, they're going to hand the ball off to Derrick Henry, and they're going to throw the ball maybe 15 to 20 times. And if they throw the ball 20 times, what's Amari Cooper's upside? I mean, it's just not there. Even if he catches 5 balls and gets 1 touchdown, he's still not going to pay off that price unless he, gets 8 catches for 100+. I just don't see it with Amari Cooper. I don't know. And again, it could just be me being burned one too many times in the past. But I am not touching him anywhere today. I don't have him on a single team.
All right. So now I get to throw out my Pac-10, Pac-12 guys. I got to say Chris Harper, really high on him. He's kind of a speedy guy. And then Nelson Aguilar, who he was great last season when Marquise Lee just didn't really have it. So those are the 2 guys I've got on a ton of my teams. I think we got to look towards Justin Hardy maybe. Jameson Crowder is kind of a PPR monster. Schuler is out there. Justin Hardy's out there. There's some pretty good receiving options. I'm kind of just going mostly as best I can with Harper and Nelson Aguilar. A little bit of Crowder. Those guys are kind of expensive, so when I'm punting my quarterback with JT Barrett, I'm ending up with those guys on a lot of teams. Who are some of the sneaky mid-level guys that are out there, Cards, that can produce with those 100-yard, 2-touchdown type games? You know, those 8, 9, 10 catch games that are off radars, because the college wide receivers churn over so much year over year that there's just a ton of guys out there. Who do you have your eye on today?
Yeah, kind of a step below the big guys. I do like Josh Harper for Fresno State tonight against USC. With Devontae Adams gone, drafted by the Packers, that's 100 or so receptions that are just out of that Fresno State lineup. I know they're breaking in a new quarterback with Carr gone as well, but Harper is going to get a good chunk of the targets for Fresno State. I think he's a solid option for the late games tonight. If you want to take a flyer, their number 2 wide receiver is a guy by the name of Aaron Peck. He's basically minimum priced everywhere, $4,500 on FanDuel, very cheap on DraftKings as well. He's a risk-reward guy, probably more of a GPP play. DraftKings only, not FanDuel, because they've priced him up, but Devin Funchess, a guy whose name you might recognize. With Gallen gone, Michigan has converted him from tight end to wide receiver. He's going to be their top wideout. Obviously, he's a big guy with some size. He'll get some targets in the red zone. So Devin Funchess, I think he's a nice play on DraftKings where he's like 4,400. Pretty nice value play there. And also Corey Davis for Western Michigan. One of the best wide receivers in the MAC. I get the luxury of seeing the MAC games quite a bit. Corey Davis is legit, and I know they're playing a Big Ten team, but if you're going to play a Big Ten team, Purdue is definitely one of the ones you want to play. I think Western Michigan could hang with them in this game, and I like Corey Davis. Just too cheap on some sites given his level of production. If you want to roster a Texas Tech wide receiver, maybe to pair with Davis Webb on the sites where he's available, Jakeem Grant is probably their go-to guy now. He won't come cheap, but he's a nice alternative. A lot of those other top-end guys that we mentioned are in the early games, so Jakeem Grant is a guy I like. And then also Rashad Green from Florida State will be Jameis Winston's top target, and could get more looks in the red zone this year with Benjamin gone as well. So one last guy I'll throw out there, Clemson. I mentioned their starting running back is out for the year, and they're breaking in a new quarterback, a new core of wide receivers, but they've got their 2 starting wide receivers, a guy by the name of Sharon Peake and then Mike Williams. It seems like the 5th Mike Williams we've had come through as a wide receiver in the last 10 or so years. It feels like they're all in the NFL for a little while, and you don't know what Mike Williams are talking about anymore. But Mike Williams for Clemson, he's a big play guy. They're talking about him being the next mini version of Sammy Watkins. So he's a pretty cheap play on every side. I've got him on some squads today if you need to save some salary. So those are some mid to cheap plays. I totally agree with all the higher-end guys you mentioned. Love Aguilar in that offense with Marquise Lee on. I think he's in store for a big year, and USC should score some points today.
Yeah, the only other guy on my list, Tony Jones. Tony Jones would be a guy to look at.
Yeah, he's the main guy for Northwestern now. Their other starting wideout, Christian Jones, is injured. So, yeah, that'd be a good target in a high-scoring game as well. And
Rashad Green, FSU. Just got to throw him back out there. He was good last year when they had tons of options. I think they're going to consolidate a little bit more towards him with as they're getting their new running backs in play. In that. Oh, speaking of running backs, I didn't even mention Taylor for Florida. That was one of the guys I wanted to highlight. The Gators. Thoughts on him?
I think
running back, because I know who owns our site and who was one of the co-founders and our colors of our site. We better mention a couple Gators if we want to be on next week.
Yeah, Taylor's a good option. I think he'll share some carries today. They'll spread the production around, but I think he's a nice option, especially where he's cheap. So, should we go into tight end really fast? I know people are going to probably have some questions, so we want to give a few minutes for those. But I'll go through some tight ends, and then we'll see. I closed the chat because that was part of what was giving us a little bit of lag at the beginning of the show. So if you have that open to take some questions, that'd be good. But my tight ends.
I can do that. So
okay.
Chat, fire up your questions. We'll get those read because we're gonna have a little bit of time here, and I'll see if there is not a rapid fire.
All right. While you're checking on that, I'll go through my tight ends. I'm a general advocate of punting the tight end position. It's kind of what I do most weeks, but this week is a little bit different animal because we don't have the super high-priced tight ends yet. We don't have the Jason Amaros and the Eric Ebrons of the world this year. So until those prices get curved out a little bit, I still think you could take one of the top guys, especially with the pricing being kind of loose this week. I don't think you need to go super cheap. Now, I still think you can if you want to, but there are some mid to high range guys that I like. Ben Koyak should see a nice boost in production for Notre Dame. Kind of the next fit in the Tyler Eifert mold for the Irish. I think he's a nice target today. Dan Vitale from Northwestern. I mentioned that's going to be a high-scoring game. They're planning to feature him more in their offense this year. Those are two mid to high guys I like in the early games. But if you want to go cheaper, Jordan Leggett from Clemson. Again, another one of those guys that's going to try to be there to fill in for some of that production in Sammy Watkins' stead. So those are the tight ends I like in the early games. Late games, Nick O'Leary, he's going to be the highest priced guy, but I think he's a lock for some production for Florida State. He's getting a lot of accolades last year. Didn't have his best season, but I think he'll put up some nice numbers against Oklahoma State tonight. And then Jake McGee for Florida. There's another Gator to throw out there for Cam. He's basically minimum price everywhere. He's a Virginia transfer and steps into a much better offensive squad now with the Gators as opposed to with Virginia. I know he's 2K on DraftKings. You can't beat that price tag. So those are some of the tight ends I have my eyes on today.
Yeah, he was one of those guys that McGee is that I rostered a bunch the last couple years because invariably I'd end up flipping on to the Virginia game because I'm in Virginia and the Pac-12 games hadn't started at this point in time. I always like to see if he could get a nice cheap 2-yard touchdown. Those are the kind of punt plays you want to look for. The only guy I've got on the list that you didn't have was Hunter Henry from Auburn. Any thoughts on him? Or because I think we really want to focus on Koyak, O'Leary, and McGee as the big three. But what about Hunter Henry?
Yeah, I like Henry. That should be a high-scoring game with Arkansas and Auburn today. He's a guy that he's a big dude. I mean, Arkansas doesn't exactly have a ton of targets in the passing game, so Henry's kind of the guy they look to in the red zone. I think they'll be throwing a lot because obviously Auburn should be ahead in this game. So Arkansas will have to throw to catch up. And Henry's a guy that can get a ton of red zone targets. I don't think you're going to see 8 to 10 catches from him, but you could see a touchdown or two. I think he's a nice play, especially at his price tag.
All right, rapid fire max. We do have some choices here. It's 6 points for a passing touchdown. The first one's very interesting, cards. Jameis Winston or Brett Hundley. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, oh, UCLA coming out to the West Coast, it's early in the morning for them. It's like 9 a.m. The one good thing, though, is they're coming off their spring train, or what do they call it, their preseason camps. So they've been up early. They've been having 2-a-days. Rest assured, they've been definitely practicing by 9 a.m. So I think they're going to be okay in this one. That's not a factor for me. That said, I've got him on a ton of my cash games. I'm leaning Winston.
Yeah,
Where's that coming from? Is that the way to go?
It's hard in cash games because they're not in the same game set because Hundley plays early and Winston plays late. So I'd still take Winston. I mean, he's more expensive on every site, and I think Winston has the better game. Florida State's going to score points.
Okay. Then we have Marcus Williams or J.T. Barrett. I don't know Marcus Williams.
But it's Marquise Williams. He's the quarterback for North Carolina, the dual threat guy. Yeah, he's the dual threat guy that Dan just loves, and I'm a big fan of his as well. The problem is we don't know if he's going to start. North Carolina is being very tight-lipped about their quarterback situation. They have a freshman by the name of Mitch Trubisky that they're very high on, and I love Marquise Williams. He's a fantasy stud, but the problem is we don't know if he's going to play. And we don't know if they're going to split snaps. They have a matchup against Liberty where they're probably going to blow the doors off of him. Either way, whether he starts or doesn't start, I don't think you're going to see more than 2 quarters out of Marquise Williams today, even though he's far more expensive on every site. I'll take Barrett based on the matchup today.
All right, I agree. We've got to go that route. How about Tevin Coleman, who we didn't really mention, or Amir Abdullah, who we've talked about, and we just know he's the risk because they're such heavy favorites. Nebraska is against
I'll
Baylor.
still take Abdullah there. He's got a much higher floor.
Okay, Tyler Boyd, wide receiver for Pitt that we did not mention, and then Jamison Crowder. I got to lean towards Crowder. I'm just checking out what we are here. Yeah, 1 point per reception. I think we got to go Crowder.
Yeah, I'd take Crowder. Both are good options. Both have good matchups against FCS schools, but I like Crowder a little bit more.
All right, and then lastly, we've got Braylon Addison for the Oregon juggernaut, who I think is going to score a lot, but it's going to be all the way down to the third team, or Devin. I don't even know how to say his last name. Cajuste.
Oh wow, he's the wide receiver for Stanford. That he'll get a lot more targets if Montgomery is limited. I can't go with him. You got to take Addison. He's much more talented.
All right, so I will agree with that just because I don't know who one of them is. So we're going Winston, Barrett, Abdullah, Crowder, and Braylon Addison. That reminds me, I didn't mention Sean Mannion. We've got some Oregon State love out there for our Pac-12 here and there. There are just so many players to talk about. I'm going to scroll up here to the 11:16 mark and throw some questions at you, Cards. We've got 6 minutes left. So, Diggs or Montgomery? I think we got to go Diggs.
I didn't mention Stefon Diggs. How horrible of me. I love Stefon Diggs. Season ended prematurely last year with an injury. And I tweeted yesterday they dismissed their number 2 wideout, Laverne Jacobs, from the team. Stefon Diggs is all they have at the wideout position. Great matchup against James Madison. And if you wanted a comp from me with Stefon Diggs, it's Tavon Austin. He reminds me a whole lot of Tavon Austin on a little bit more limited scale. I mean, I don't think he's going to put up the numbers that Tavon Austin did, but I think you're going to see a huge year from Stefon Diggs. I'm glad somebody asked that question because I meant to touch on him over when we went through wide receivers. And Montgomery's a little banged up, might be limited in that game today. That's an easy choice for me. You got to go with Diggs.
All right. What about Ezekiel Elliott of Ohio State?
Not touching it with the injury concerns. Don't know how many carries he's going to get between him and Rod Smith. He just had wrist surgery 3 weeks ago. Urban Meyer's kind of tight-lipped on what they're going to do with the carry split. Wouldn't touch him today.
Is Nick Marshall worth the risk today?
Only in a GPP, and only if you're comfortable losing the dollars if he does not play. I mean, there's so many options for guaranteed production. We told you, how dangerous it is in college football if you get a 0. He's not gonna start. Does that mean he's not gonna play a series, a quarter, a half? Let's take it worst case scenario. Let's say he doesn't play the first half, and Auburn's already up 3 touchdowns. He's not gonna do much in the second half. I don't see the upside there. There's just so many quarterbacks that are guaranteed production today. I think it's a little silly to take that risk.
All right, tight end Eric Ebron or Austin Seferian-Jenkins. Wait a second. I may have scrolled too far back for that one. Who's your cheap tight end of the day? 2K on DraftKings, please. I believe it's going to be McGee, but is there anybody else?
Yeah, it's got to be McGee if you want a 2K on DraftKings. I think Jordan Leggett is 2K in the early games if you need one for the early games.
All right. Chris Harper or Crowder? I'm still going Crowder. Harper is so big play dependent. I mean, and I think he'll get 2 touchdowns today, but points per reception, which most sites are, I think you really want to look at Crowder.
I think it's about equal. Crowder with a cakewalk matchup. So Duke, they could take the air out of the ball in the second half. I'd lean Crowder, but I think that's close. And if that's a GPP, I'd probably take a shot on Harper.
All right, Harper and Goldson, Deshaun Goldson, or Devin Gardner, Tony Jones.
Give me Gardner and Jones. I like Gardner today.
Okay, Trayvon Green, Carlos Williams, assuming equal price, and what is the differential you would need to call them a tie?
I mean, it depends on the sites, and that's got to be an all-day slate because Green plays during the day and Williams plays in the night slate. I'd say, and FanDuel is the only one I know of that's offering all-day slates, so assuming that's a FanDuel pricing question, I would say that Green would have to be $500 cheaper for me to take him over Williams.
All right. I'm looking up here. Braylon Addison, Christmas is saying he is out for the year?
I might have missed that. I can go to my injury page.
It's looking like April 10th he went down with an ACL injury. Oh, is that a free spot on the board?
It might be. You know, I wondered. I haven't looked too deep into the Oregon wide receivers yet because I'm not using any of them today. Yeah, you're right. Whoever that is in the chat, thank you. Yeah, he's out with an ACL. That's a free square. Take Devin Cahoosty on your pick fives.
All right, and that's put those hands together for Christmas, because today is like Christmas morning, as you tweeted out, and here we just got a present from Christmas. This is awesome.
Yeah, I had totally forgotten about that. You know, I remember it now that they said it, that he went down. You know, it's been so long. It's been 4 months that he's been out. And again, I just haven't done a ton of research on Oregon yet, since I'm not rostering any of their players today. Kind of figure I'd see how that box score shakes out. But, you know, Oregon is just, even though they play so fast, they just use so many guys. I mean, you could see 7 different guys score a touchdown for Oregon today.
Josh Ferguson we didn't mention, or Tevin Coleman?
I mentioned Ferguson a little bit. I like him on DraftKings with the full PPR. He catches a lot of passes. Coleman's really good. I've seen some sites that have Coleman ranked as a top 5 running back today. So I'll take Coleman by a hair, but I couldn't fault you for going either way there. I think both are fine.
Okay, Davis and Yeldon, or Prescott and Green?
Davis. Trying to figure out what Davis.
I'm trying to figure out which Davis.
I'm going to have to clarify what Davis if you want.
I think a quarterback, but I don't know which one.
Yeah. Clarify your Davis and we'll get back to you.
Is James Conner on your radar?
Not today. They share carries at Pitt too much. No. There's too many other options today.
All right. And then Kyle Prater or Corey Robinson?
Corey Robinson, love the pick for Notre Dame today. He's going to be their main red zone target. As a cheap play, he would have been another guy I would have mentioned. I like him.
All right. So I think that's going to wrap up the show for today. We've got a few changes we got to make out there. Again, thank you, Christmas. Hit on that draft day rapid fire max and get your free square while it's still up. Actually, you know what? That may not be a bad play for them. Cards, because name recognition.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, could that possibly have been intentional? I don't think so, but.
Well, I remember 2 guys on a show once upon a time that saw Johnny Peralta against a pitcher and thought, there's no way Peralta's going to lose this unless, as your famous word said,
2 homers.
He gets 2 home runs. And he went out and did it. So you never know. Even when you think it's a sure thing, you never know. Perhaps a couple fumbles for our hero here, and we're going to be cursing Christmas. But that's okay. It's going to be Christmas all day. We've got all sorts of games to watch, all the way into the wee hours when the University of Washington mighty Huskies are taking on the Rainbow Warriors in Hawaii. So with that,
just a heads up real quick, I'm reading an August 4th article. Braylon Addison actually is talking about coming back next week, even though he injured his ACL in April. So that would be like an Adrian Peterson type recovery for him. So just keep your eye on that situation. I mean, we can talk more about Addison next week. Obviously, that Oregon-Michigan State game will be a big one. I'm not touching Oregon today. I'd suggest you do the same, but we'll get some more clarity on that situation next week.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of value, too, throughout the years. Oregon mixes and matches their stable of speed, because they've got a lot of fast guys. But with that, we have all sorts of content out there. There's still our articles are up. You can go back, kind of listen to the shows, even after the early lock games. You can catch some nuggets here for the late games. Cards and Dan put out a great series called The Playbook, where they're focusing on the quarterback, the wide receiver, and the running back positions. Now, is that going to be a weekly feature?
Yeah.
You guys are doing?
Yep.
Excellent. And then we've got the podcast, and then the Thursday night show. And I missed out on the Thursday night show because I was driving on down here to Virginia Beach. But that's usually must viewing to me. I was going to listen to it in the car, but right as we were leaving, I got a little notice that said I was nearing my data limit. And sadly, I don't know how to download YouTube to my phone and then play it without incurring data costs. Because I'm an idiot, but I know fantasy sports. So, with that, thank you, DraftKings, for sponsoring the show. Thank you, Roto Grinders. Thank you, Cards. I am EMac. Tune in today at 5:30 for a Major League Baseball show, and then again tomorrow at 11:30 for Major League Baseball. Good luck, gamers.